I'm recording my homily for the first Sunday of Ordinary Time, also known as the Baptism of the Lord. This is 2020. I don't have a whole lot of great insights this week on this, but there's just a couple things that have struck me. So the baptism of Jesus actually is one of three events that we as Catholics hold to be Epiphany events. So the week before, we looked at the Epiphany in terms of the Magi, so the Magi coming to visit Jesus. Now, in every one of these three events that I'm going to describe just really briefly, there is an aspect of being embarrassed or being pulled out of one's comfort zone. So have you ever noticed when you're embarrassed, you're really outside your comfort zone, right? Somebody says something, does something, you trip, you fall in front of people, people laugh at you, something happens, you feel embarrassed, you're pulled out of your comfort zone. Every one of these Epiphany events, somebody is getting pulled out of their comfort zone, but they're doing it willingly. They're saying, okay, I choose to do this, because the reality is when we get pulled out of our comfort zone, that's the zone where we grow. That's where we become better, if you will. So when we become embarrassed, it's usually a sign of our pride, and so we grow in humility, right? Okay, so when the Magi come to visit Jesus, they're pulled out of their comfort zone. They're literally, they choose to leave their homeland, their families, their wealth, their homes. Did I already say that? Anyways, they choose to leave everything to come to this poor little family. So there's something that's happening in their hearts that's allowing them to be pulled out of their comfort zone. And then because of that, they get to experience something really great and profound. Another event, Epiphany event, is when Jesus is revealed to us miraculously through his miracles, right? So he's not revealed to us miraculously. He's revealed through his miracles at the wedding feast at Cana, right? That's his first miracle. In some ways, it is the beginning of his ministry. Now, who gets pulled out of their comfort zone? Jesus does, right? So this is an example where he's setting a model for us. Jesus' mother comes to him and says, we need this. He says, it's not my time. And she says, he's going to do it, right? He gets pulled out of his comfort zone by his mom. And so he's setting an example for us of a willingness to get pulled out of our comfort zone. Now, those people who say they have a great devotion to Mary, do not underestimate your heavenly mother's ability to pull you out of your comfort zone. She's a mom, right? And moms do that because they want us to grow, because they love us, because they want us to become the best that we can be, to become saints, right? Okay. So that's another example. Well, today is the baptism of the Lord. Now, the baptism of the Lord, he is revealing himself in terms of the sacraments through baptism. That's the gateway of all the sacraments. In some ways, for me, though, it's also an image of the beginning of his ministry, because he's an adult now. It's really odd to finish the Christmas season with Jesus as an adult getting baptized. And so in some ways, it's like we are truly fast-forwarding from his flight into Egypt all the way up until he truly begins. Now he's going to have the baptism, and then he's going to immediately go into the desert, right, for 40 days. Okay, so in the baptism scenario, who's getting embarrassed? Who's getting pulled out of their comfort zone? It's John the Baptist. Right? He's like, Lord, you need to baptize me. Right? I'm not even worthy to carry your sandals. And Jesus says, to complete all righteousness, let it be. Let's do this. So he's setting an example for us. He's being baptized to show us the path, right? Okay, so John gets pulled out of his comfort zone. So that's basically my homily. But anyways, we'll go into it a little bit more. Okay. When I was in high school, I really despised literature class. And it was always the biggest book, right? It was like a brick. And I would get that book and I'm like, oh man. And the stories in it were like, Old English and just boring stories to me as a teenager. Because that's just not where I was inclined. I loved my welding class. Now, the irony of all of this is in my welding class, my teacher was actually pretty pathetic. He didn't care. He really didn't care about us. I could have learned so much more, but he wasn't really being a very good teacher. But I still loved the class. Now, I loved the class because it was fun, and in some ways because I wasn't even being challenged. It was easy. But I was doing something I liked, right? Literature, on the other hand, I had great teachers. I really had great teachers. They were so passionate about the literature and about what we were learning, but I hated the class because it just wasn't my cup of tea, right? Now, which one of those was I more inclined to be pulled out of my comfort zone in? Definitely literature. But I wouldn't be open to that. I didn't want that. So as we mature, we begin to recognize that there's things in our life where God wants to pull us out of our comfort zone so that we can become better, we can grow, we can mature, right? I think this is true also in terms of our faith. This last weekend, I was at Mass, and I was kind of in a bad mood. So when you get in a bad mood, don't you look at things a little bit more negatively? I was doing that. I was really noticing just how many people were not singing at Mass. Now, I got to be honest, at St. Mary's, people actually are pretty good. Engagement level's pretty high, but I think we had a Sunday morning, I think we're tired of it just being dark, at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, it's dreary, it's cold. And so people come in, and they're not really feeling like it's time to worship. They're not awake yet, right? So I'm looking out at the people, and I'm like, oh, nobody's singing, right? Now, that wasn't true. I was in a bad mood, so I was looking at it negatively. But for me, there's a symbol of engagement. You see, for many years in my own life, I gave in to the lie that my faith was private. That it was just about me. It was about me and God. And there is a component that is, yes, about me and God, but faith cannot be private. You know what happens when our faith becomes private? Is we watch our world burn, right? It's been really hard for me, like the example of the airliner in Iran that was accidentally shot down, and I believe it was an accident, but what caused that accident? It was the idiocy of people wanting to kill, between Iran and the United States, and the United States and Iran. And it's absurdity. It's like little kids fighting in the sandbox. Now, are the difficulties, are the challenges in our world real? Yes. But how do we deal with them, right? Does our faith mean anything in how we approach the world? Or do we just join everybody else, and when we're angry, we just give in to the anger? Or when we're, our faith is just private, so we just don't really care? That's when our communities just keep going downhill. Jesus sets a model for us in his ministry that he goes out into those communities. He seeks them out, right? Yesterday in the readings, you had Jesus curing Peter's mother-in-law. So he was in Capernaum, he was in his house, but there's these waves of people coming to him, and there's some people who are ill, and there's people who are possessed by demons, and he's curing them in their town. And then when he's done, he goes to another town. And so I think he wants us to cure the ill, and he wants us to cast out the demons in our own communities. I think really everything Jesus does is demonstrating to us how our faith is not private. It must be shared. Now, if good Catholics were to go to hell, I wonder if many of us will go to hell because we never completed our mission. We never actually did what Jesus wanted us to do. We might have gone through the steps of learning and growing, of receiving our first sacraments, et cetera, or receiving the sacraments, but those are meant to push us out of our comfort zone into the world, right? But what if we never went out into the world? What if we never did anything? What if we never lived our faith outside of our comfort zone, right? Now, one of the little insights I got in this was also the idea that just as Jesus sometimes embarrasses us, he embarrasses John the Baptist, right? There's times where he embarrasses Peter. There's times where he embarrasses Judas. He's not trying to embarrass them or shame them per se, but he's forcing them to become more than who they are, right, in that moment. And I think Jesus wants us to go out in the world and embarrass the world. Embarrass them with their sinfulness. Embarrass them with God's mercy and his love, but courageously. So I'm reading a book right now on Father Stanley Rother. He was a priest from Oklahoma, and he is the only martyr from the United States who was born in the United States. He's the only martyr we have. We've been a country for over 200 years, right? And we have one martyr. So, we're going to be forming a committee next week here at St. Mary's where we're going to plan on how to become martyrs. Just kidding. I said that and people just laughed. Father Stanley had his problems. He struggled in school. In fact, he was kicked out of a seminary. There was a seminary he was attending, and they literally sent him home and kicked him out of the seminary because he wasn't doing his work, he wasn't studying, and he was failing all his classes. Well, he ended up going to another seminary where they really understood him. The rector, the priest in charge, really understood him and helped give him the fatherly direction that he needed, which he wasn't getting. And so he became a priest, and he always struggled in some ways with some of the academic stuff. But there was, in the 1960s, the Pope talked to the American bishops, and he said, I want you to send missionaries down into Central and South America. I want you to adopt these dioceses. I want you to be sending lay missionaries and priests and religious. So Oklahoma decided to really take this on. So they were sending priests and laity down there and some religious. Well, Father Stanley became one of those priests who went down there. And he spent many years down there. Well, around 1980, 1981, things became really unstable in Guatemala, which was where he was. And they were worried about him and their team dying, getting killed. So they brought him home. Well, Father Stanley comes home, and then he realizes he made a mistake. And so he immediately goes back. He says, it's my people. He says, a shepherd can't run. So that became his motto. A shepherd can't run. Can't run from difficulty. When he was down there, he was constantly pushed out of his comfort zone. He was a farm boy from Oklahoma, and he goes down into Guatemala to a very different culture, incredibly different culture. But he managed to find ways to draw connections and to enter into the lives of these indigenous people in this little tiny town. And he loved it. And he died for them. He was eventually killed in the midst of all the instability down there. But he had to go, right? He had to stay down there. So the essential fruit of our ministry is not what we do here at the church, because that's our enjoyment, that's our fun, that's how we get rejuvenated and learn and grow. But it is out in the world. And that's where Jesus wants sometimes to embarrass us And our Heavenly Mother sometimes wants to embarrass us, but so that we can bring Him into the world and embarrass the world with His love and with His mercy, so that they can open their hearts and grow also. All right. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.